Hello, this is Christian Sputzer once again from Clockwork. We are continuing our webinar series on the 8 stages of successful retained search. And today we're going to talk about stage 7, decision. This is where your client makes the decision to hire one of your candidates that you presented. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about how you're going to assist that client in making this decision, to talk about reference checks and negotiations, and how you go about closing out your project so it ends strong and not whimper. So again, this is our process. This is step 7 of 8, the decision process. And you have, if you've gone through this process from the very beginning, built confidence within your client that they don't need to look anymore, that you have presented them with the appropriate information, the appropriate candidates. They have what they need to make a decision. Therefore, you don't continue to drag out this process longer than it needs to go. You're driving the results. So this is about information, right? And it's two-sided. It's information that you provide to the client about the market, about the candidates, about the skill sets that the candidate that you're presenting has or have, if you're planning multiple ones. And on the other side of it, you need to make sure that you've presented the candidate that ultimately is going to get the offer with enough information to make a good decision. That they no longer need to do their research. They have what they need. It's a binary decision. It's no longer, they don't need to drag it out on their end either. And that's the culmination of your work on this project. You've done the research, you've set the strategy, you have the job spec, you've communicated it, you've teamed the candidates as they've talked to them during the outreach stage, and you've prepped them both in your assessment interview for what to look for and what they need to know to make a decision. So on both sides, you've informed the relevant parties, the candidate and the client. Sometimes, though, still, as the consultant to your client, you need to play somewhat of a therapist. And that depends on your relationship and how deep you go with your client. And if they are unsure of what they need to do, this is where you've built that trust so you can help your client. You can have a candid one-off conversation. If you feel like they are still unsure, you need to remind them of all of the work that you have done together. That this has been a collaborative process, and they know that you've got the information they need and you've done the work. They're not going to be continuing to ask who else is out there because you've done the process correctly. You need to remind them of that. You need to understand that the candidate that you recommend is the right fit for your team, and they will get to that decision faster. But really, the relationship you have built is going to help you quite a bit at this stage, because these are big decisions, these are senior executives, and this impacts the company. So you need to really you've built that confidence along the way, and this is where you get to use it. Part of the final candidate process can be reference check, background check, personality testing. There are a lot of services that can do that for you. Many of them on our website at clockworkrecruiting.com. You can check them out for background checks and personality testing. If you want to do psychometrics, there are many services available. Reference checks, you or your team can do them, but you should go into those knowing what you're going to focus on. Ask the hard questions. Make sure you understand before you pick up the phone and talk to these references provided by your candidate what it is that you are looking for, and obviously listen for red flags. And what they are may depend on the candidate or the particular role that you're recruiting for, but you need to double click on anything that stands out as abnormal and make sure that you get that information, because even though you are very close to finishing, you want to finish strong. Don't skip this step. Reference checks is a very important part of this service you are providing. Preparing for negotiations. This is where the offer comes together on the client side and is presented to the candidate. So you work for the client. You are an agent for the client. And the level of involvement in the offer negotiations is really a personal choice. Some search partners will stay out of it and let the client directly negotiate with the candidate. Some will be heavily involved, and some are somewhere in the middle. It's up to you, but making sure that you are preparing both sides ahead of time, knowing what expectations for compensation are from the candidate. Not so much their history in many places and jurisdictions in the US. You're not allowed to ask that question, so make sure you understand the requirements in your jurisdiction. But knowing what is expected, meeting expectations, tempering expectations on both sides. If they're wildly off, then that's going to make the negotiation process harder. So before you get to the offer that your client extends, make sure you understand what the candidate expects and make sure what your client expects. And that's where you can kind of play the middle and make sure that you're doing your part to get people to align to their expectations. And it kind of goes without saying. Often, the retained model involves a retainer, a percentage of the compensation of the first year compensation of the candidate you place. But commission, upsell, these are things that clients sometimes worry about. It shouldn't factor in, and you should make sure that the client understands that you're there to place the best candidate. And sometimes you have to pay more for the best candidate, and they need to understand that. But your commission, your ultimate, the third retainer, shouldn't matter in this. This doesn't factor in. And an offer is made by the client, and if it is accepted by the candidate, then you have a contract. Contract, is worth the paper it's written on. So a verbal acceptance is in fact a contract, but it's hard to enforce. So make sure that these things are written down, and this should come from the company, not from you. This is between the company, a contract between the company and the candidate. But the administration piece, making sure that these things are delivered, read, understood, signed, executed, this is where you can help. You can chase that down. If you are hands off, you are relying upon the administrative aspects from the client's company and from your candidate. And your job is to make sure that these things get done. So staying involved at this stage is key. Even though you may have a hands-off approach to some of the negotiations, the offer structure, stay involved with getting it done. Don't throw your hands up and say, I delivered the candidate and it's up to them to do it. That may be true, but it is your job and why they hire a search firm in the first place to get the placement and get it placed with a great candidate as quickly as possible. So that does involve staying involved. Lastly, this is your project. It is your project to close, not only to make sure that it closes well and you maintain a relationship with your client, your candidate, but just so that you can get your documentation ready and leverage it for your next work as you become more and more specialized in your practice. So capture that data. Understand what the start date is, when the compensation is going to be, so that you can have a reference point. You placed this executive on this date and the compensation was that. You could speak to that the next time a similar project comes up down the road. So document everything that is agreed upon. And make sure you set follow-ups with your client and your candidate so that you have a good understanding of how things are going. Maintain the relationship you've established with your client and your candidate because that is where your greatest likelihood of referrals or repeat business are going to come from. If your relationship ends well on the project, maintain that relationship with a 30, 60, 90 or 6 month, 1 year check-in with both parties. It's a good excuse or good reason to stay in touch and then possibly suss out any other opportunities that may exist, whether within that company or somewhere within their personal network. And then finally, make sure you follow up with your other candidates. That you place one candidate, you may have others in the background. Don't leave them hanging. That is a way to hurt your reputation, your credibility, because you, as you specialize, will likely come back to candidates that you have talked to on other projects. If they feel like you left them in the dark, you ghosted them, they're going to be less likely to help you out, less likely to listen, even if it's in their best interest. So go back to them, tell them what happened, make sure that you you're straightforward and honest, and that they, provide feedback where you can, they will appreciate that a lot more than if you just um, don't get back to them for worries that it's going to hurt their feelings. So this is decision stage. If you'd like to continue to learn more about this or any of the other stages in this process, you can go to our website at clockworkrecruiting.com. And then our next one will be our last one on closing and growing your business. So stay tuned for that. Thanks.